Land of song, said the warrior bard, though all the world betrays thee, one sword at least thy rights shall guard, one faithful harp shall praise thee.
Skelteren. Now.
So, seeing as how the previous episode covered my least favorite tribe in the Children of Gaia, it's only fitting that I now cover my favorite tribe, the Fianna. So, I better address why they're my favorite. Well, in case this handsome selfie doesn't give it away, I got Irish blood in me. Sure, I was born a proud American and will die a proud American, but I also take my Irish heritage very seriously. Edinburgh. That also includes my Celtic ancestry, which the majority of Irish people are descended from. So really, it's no surprise that this is gonna be my favorite tribe. This episode just gives me an excuse to gush over my heritage. Also, yes, expect jokes centered around alcoholism.
Is that it, Father? Are you seeing things as they really are at last?
Oh my God!
That's it, all right. I suppose sobriety for Father Jack must be sort of like taking some mad hallucinogenic.
In the ancient days, there was a werewolf that found himself separated from his pack. He howled out into the night, hoping someone would hear. But all there was him, a gibbous moon, and his bittersweet song of despair and loneliness. Or so he thought. Someone did hear his song. A woman came upon him. Her heart had been frozen, but the wolf's song had melted the ice and brought tears to her eyes. Where her tears fell, a blue sky flower grew. She joined his song with her own, longing for the fierce beauty of this wolf, sorrow for his mortality, and joy for the promise in his voice and spirit. She then took wolf form, and the two ran off into the night. When the dawn came, the werewolf found himself alone again. The woman was gone. 9 years passed before the werewolf would behold her again, but this time she came back with something. Twin children. A girl with strong elfin features like her mother, and a boy with the feral visage of his father. The woman was Danu, mother of the Tuatha De Danann. She had come to bring the boy to his father, while she would take the girl Fianna to her home of Tirnanog, the land where death has no reach. The boy would be the first of the Fianna songkeepers. That is the legend of how the Fianna began. Now, if there was a tribe that actually opposed the Impergium, it was the Fianna. The way they saw it, it was their duty to shepherd humanity. Now, sometimes that meant on occasion having to call the weak and more uppity ones, but they also bred with the best of humans. When humans discovered smithing, a division formed within the Fianna. Some feared what the humans would later learn to forge as it would strengthen them, but others saw value in it and allowed it so long as they only made weapons for the Fianna. In fact, Fianna used humans to do their dirty work. They would arm one of their kinfolk with a weapon and sing tales of his ancestors' deeds, stirring them into a frenzy and sicking them at a rival clan. Impergium by proxy, if you will. Of course, it also got their egos a bit inflated. In the War of Rage, the Fianna took part in basically what amounted to, well, let's not beat around the bush, ethnic cleansing against the other Ferret tribes. All except one, the Corax, the Were-Ravens. The Fianna lands were sheltered to the Corax, and they haven't forgotten that kindness to this day. Now, even though I've been referring to the tribe as the Fianna, they didn't always call themselves that. Actually, throughout their early history, the tribe didn't even have a name. They were more a loose collection of clans that identified more strongly with their local kinfolk than the tribe as a whole. They were once all over Europe, the Balkans, Gaul, and of course the British Isles. It was in the British Isles, mainly what would become Ireland, that the Fianna as we know them came to be. The Fianna had already settled the land long before the Celts invaded, but when the Celts did arrive, the Fianna found in them worthy kinfolk, and so they decided they would breed with them. In Ireland, they would also forge bonds with the Tuatha De Danann and founded the Septs of the Tri-Spiral in Silver Tara, which they still hold to this day. However, the Fianna were soon beset by a new enemy, seaborn monsters that reeked of worm taint, the Fomorians. These deformed and misshapen creatures were unlike any enemy they had faced. They demanded every village's third child, or they would strip the land of its fertility. The Fianna besieged the Tuatha De Danann to intervene, but they could not, for the Fomorians matched the Tuatha De Danann in power as they were the men of Domnu, the dark sister of Danu. Instead, the Tuatha De Danann bade the Fianna fight with them, calling upon their ancient blood ties. The Fianna weren't about to let worm-tainted monsters run roughshod throughout their lands, so to war against the Fomorians they marched. The war was long and bloody, and many Fianna died. At the Battle of Plain of Towers, the Fianna and Tuatha De Danann finally claimed victory over the Fomorians. They fled to the west, never to return to Ireland again. The site of their victory would be consecrated as the Cairn of Red Plain, as a tribute to the blood their brothers shed on that great day. The Tuatha De Danann would later depart for Tir na Nog, never to return, but left behind their descendants, the Fae, who would also become kin to the Fianna. But the Fianna weren't done fighting just yet. The worm's taint still remained in the land, corrupting everything it touched. It even could make the bodies of dead Fomorians rise up and walk. It was from this that the enemy known as the Fomori was born, the worm's shock troopers. Flesh corrupted by the taint of the worm. The Fianna were weakened from their last war, but they managed to win. They would drive back these defiled foes and burn their bodies. Across the British Isles, they claimed victory. Throughout Europe, the Fianna would clash with the Black Furies in the south and get a Fenris in the north. But a new enemy would change everything, an enemy the size of which they had never met.
Roma!
The Fianna had caught wind of the worm taint infesting the city and did their best to cleanse it. But their greatest opposition would not come from wormbanes, humans, or even the vampires that had dug themselves deep into the heart of Rome. No, it would be fellow Garou, more specifically the Warders of Men, the tribe that would become the Glasswalkers. The Warders had claimed the citizens of Rome as kinfolk, and thus the worm taint was theirs to deal with. But as far as the Fianna saw it, they were just in their way. Things would only get worse with a series of defeats for the Celts at the hands of the Romans, followed by Julius Caesar seizing control of the Roman government and transforming it into the Roman Empire. Fianna, Geta, Fenris, Silverfang all tried to wage war against Rome, and each of them failed. Only the White Howlers in Scotland were able to hold back the Roman advance, but the Fianna refused to roll over and accept defeat. An exiled Fianna prince from Gaul named Sivantrix would journey to Ireland with his kinsmen and demand that the rest of the Fianna acknowledge him as High King. This claim would be challenged by Ardred Elim of the Red Claws, and the two dueled. In the end, Elim would be victorious, and Sivantrix's men would bend the knee to him and acknowledge him as High King. Under Elim, the Fianna would be a united front against all who opposed them. Whether they be Fenrir, Silverfang, or Rome, the children of Stag would never lose their land to invaders. Over in Scotland, though, things would take a dark turn. The White Howlers would vanish from the face of the earth, replaced by the worm-tainted Black Spiral Dancers. While it pained them to slay former kinsmen, the Fianna marched into Scotland to take it back from the worm, and were successful in their endeavors, making the whole of the British Isles their lands. The Fianna cursed themselves for allowing this to happen because the Corax warned them of it and they paid no heed. As Rome grew larger and more bloated, eventually too large to manage, and with resources spread too thin, it would find itself vulnerable to attacks from the Saxons, Picts, and Celts, aided by their werewolf brethren in Roman Britain. Fighting got so bad that Garou from House Conquering Claw of the Silverfangs stepped in to put everyone in their place, and effectively wrested control of Britain from the Fianna. It wasn't long before the Roman Empire completely collapsed in on itself, making Britain ripe for the taking for the Fianna, but they had to contend with the Fenrir and their Saxon kinfolk. It got even harder with raids from Scandinavian Fenrir and their Viking kinfolk, so try as they did to bring Britain back to its Celtic roots, the Fianna would lose it. The Angles, Saxons, and Utes would claim it and transform it into England, with Scotland and Wales to fall soon after, but the Fianna kept Ireland. In the wake of Rome's collapse came the rise of Christianity throughout Europe. Missionaries would go far and wide to convert pagans. The Fianna would find themselves on good terms with the Christians of the British Isles, as they preserved their myths and traditions, even if they were somewhat sanitized. They appreciated the gesture of reverence nonetheless. It's thanks to those Christians that tales like Finn McCool are still told to this day. Later on, England would be conquered again, but this time by the Normans. By the time of Henry II, England was setting its sights on Ireland, but so were the Silverfangs as well. The Fianna wanted to keep their lands in cairns, and as much as they hated it, they saw the Normans as the lesser of two evils. At least under the Normans, they would keep their cairns. But as time moved on, the Fae's power would begin to fade from the world. The exact reasons are unknown. The Christianization of the land, a war between Fae houses, massive death from war, famine, and plague, the rise of science and reason, or perhaps a combination of all of them. But what is known is that when the Fae nobility fled this world, they left something behind, their subjects. These Fae refugees would become the Changelings. They would find refuge in the halls of the Fianna, but they would also make war with one another. To curb this, the Fianna laid down the law by forcing the changelings to abide by the oaths the Fianna's ancestors had sworn to the Tuatha De Danann, and brought a measure of peace into the changeling community. But things would take a dark turn for the Fianna. This would be the beginning of their fall, and it all started with one man. A man whose name is cursed throughout history, and rightly so. That man was Oliver Cromwell. Cromwell had seized control of the English government after conspiring in a coup against King Charles I. And being a Protestant, Cromwell instituted brutal, tyrannical, anti-Catholic policies throughout Britain, and no one felt it harder than the Catholic Irish. Cromwell troops would seize land and raze entire towns and villages to the ground even after they had surrendered. Two of the most notorious examples were the towns of Drogheda and Wexford, which were slaughtered to the man, woman, and child. Fianna would rise up against Cromwell troops, but in the end it was fruitless as Cromwell managed to put down all resistance in Ireland and annexed it into the Commonwealth of England. Now, while this was the start of the Fianna's fall, they did enjoy a few good times still. One such time was when they seized England back from the Silver Fangs. The ruling Fang house at that time was House Wintersnow. The king demanded an army of Fianna and Fenrir at his back to deal with black spiral dancers up in Scotland, and he was prepared to use an ancient Fang artifact to get them to lockstep. The Fianna wisely decided to let the king think he agreed, but in reality, he had laid a trap for him. The Fianna and Fenrir took heavy casualties, but it was worth it. They had ended the Fang's rule and England belonged to the Fianna again. But things would again turn bad. England under George I would put an end to Scottish and Irish independence and incorporate them into the United Kingdom of Great Britain. Rapid industrialization would ruin the land and kill local wildlife, and the potato famine would devastate the Irish people. A fungal blight spread throughout Ireland's potato crops and in some cases destroyed entire fields overnight. The Fianna did their best to heal the land, but it was useless. In the end, millions of Irish people were forced to leave their home to Canada and America to find a new life, the Fianna very much included. As they began to settle the American West, the Fianna, along with other European tribes, would come into conflict with the Yucatina and Wendigo, the native tribes. War, starvation, and disease had killed off many of their kinfolk and placed them at the mercy of the European tribes. The Fianna were one of several that took advantage of that weakness and set about conquering the land. As far as they saw it, the natives rolled over and accepted defeat, while their brothers back in Ireland wouldn't even give up their cairns to the Silver Fangs. But if there's one thing they're ashamed of, it's their culpability in the death of the Bunyip, werewolves from Australia and one of the Lost Tribes. Now, while this later turned out to be a setup by Black Spiral dancers, the Fianna still feel guilt for having taken part in it all the same. During World War I, Fianna would fight tooth and claw to defend cairns near trenches throughout Europe, and even took part in daring raids on Black Spiral dancer hives. While they put up a good fight, the results were ultimately inconclusive as to who the victor was. When World War II came, the Fianna once again leapt into battle against the dancers and won most of their battles. They also managed to make it through the war with pretty much all of their cairns intact, but they paid a hefty price for it all the same. And even after the war ended, they still got more of a Pyrrhic victory because more land throughout the British Isles would continue to be developed. And that's to say nothing of the Troubles. Yeah, in Northern Ireland, there were Fianna that got in bed with both the IRA and the UDF, despite many of the tribal elders protesting such. But luckily, most of the tribe had the good sense to stay out of it and shield their kinfolk. Today, the Fianna are not in a good place. Ireland has been so radically changed by rapid industrialization thanks to EU money that the weavers managed to spin its webs across the country. And to make matters worse, the Black Spiral dancers are coming back to Scotland, but the Fianna will make their stand regardless. The Fianna are one of the tribes that have kept to their old ways. Sure, they've made a few changes and updates here and there, but overall, their traditions are more or less the same as they were 1,000 years ago. The tribal totem of the Fianna is Stag, an ancient totem that can assume 3 forms. The White Hart, which is passion and romance, the Horned One, the masculine power of nature, and Cernunnos, the god of the forest and master of the wild hunt. In all forms, Stag demands respect be paid to him. Now, something I want you to take notice of is that Stag has 3 forms. 3. Things coming in threes comes up a lot in the Fianna. The tribe is organized into 3 different classes. Warriors, which are made up of Arun and Ragabash, Bards, which are made up of Galliards and Ragabash, and Druids, which are made up of Philodox, Theurges, Ragabash, and Galliards. Fianna sets are led by a Reek, basically the Celtic word for king. The Reek is advised by a council of song which is made up of Theurges and Galliards. The Reeks are able to rule their septs as they see fit, but will acknowledge stronger sept leaders as their betters. The greatest of Reeks is the Ardrig, or High King, though this title doesn't carry much weight outside of Ireland. Another important part of Fianna culture is fostering. A younger Fianna will be placed in the care of an older Fianna, usually a blood relative, with it being the elder's task to mentor the younger one in the ways of the tribe and Garou society. The Fianna are big believers in kith and kin. They value family highly and also believe that it's their duty to straighten out family that go astray, like the Black Spiral Dancers. Fianna guard their families because it reminds them of what they have to fight for. Their families give them something to come home to and someone to be there when they need to be patched up for the next battle. They don't just guard their human kinfolk, wolfkin as well. Fianna tend to get involved with preserving wolf populations and have managed to find some success in the Scottish Highlands. Also, did I mention that the Fianna are kin to the Fae? Because the Fianna are kin to the Fae. The Fianna are some of the more extroverted of the Garou and are hopeless romantics to boot. They make great artists and craftsmen, but they can be slaves to their passions. And when I say slaves to their passions, I mean it's why they have more metis than they'd like to deal with. Fianna can also be a bit too obsessed with aesthetics to the point that they view deformity as a sign of spiritual corruption, and it's not just limited to metis. Fianna that are scarred beyond a Garou's ability to heal can find themselves shunned as well. Now, given that the Fianna have kept to the old ways, they also still celebrate the old Celtic seasonal festivals, in bulk, to celebrate the end of winter and beginning of spring, and by extension, life beginning anew. Beltane, the changing of spring to summer. You likely know it as May Day, a time where challenges are made and Fianna go wild. Lianessa, the end of summer and the beginning of autumn, a time of preparation for winter and one last party to offset winter's sorrows. And finally Samhain, where autumn becomes winter and the barrier between the physical world and spirit world thins. It's a time of introspection as well as battle as warm banes come through, but a Fianna will never pass up a good fight. By the way, you likely know Samhain as Halloween. Most of the Fianna are Hamid, but they're pretty diverse, in that they come from different places. You can find Fianna Garou and kinfolk in America, Canada, New Zealand, and Australia. And of course, the British Isles are dominated by the Fianna. England, Scotland, Wales, and the homeland itself, Ireland. Fianna lupus are guarded and protected like treasure. Arguably, they value kin more than the Hamid do, and lupus will sometimes remind their Hamid kin not to get too wrapped up in human matters and set their priorities straight. Fianna metis are like your semi-retarded cousin thrice removed. Technically part of the family, but if an accident were suddenly to befall him and he perished, nobody's gonna really miss him, and no chance in hell he gets the traditional Irish wake. If there's one thing uniting all Fianna, it's that wherever they come from, Celtic blood flows in their veins.
You don't have to be hard asses, do you?
Yeah, it's St. Paddy's Day. Everyone's Irish tonight.
Alright, so let's start up by agreeing to avoid the drunken Irishman stereotype.
Drink!
It's not drink, Father, it's just fizzy water.
Jacob's Creek Chardonnay 1991!
Funny as that could be, let's at least try to show that we're taking this seriously. Fianna hold the three values: hospitality,
bye-bye, come on, all you time-wasting bastards, back on the streets, come on, bye!
generosity,
250 gets you this much. You can have the rest when you come back with the other 50p. But you... Thank you!
and bravery.
We're not quitters.
I am a quizzer. I come from a long line of quizzers. It's amazing I'm here at all.
Of course, it's also worth mentioning that where a Fianna grows up is largely going to influence how they behave. For example, a Scottish Fianna
here in Scotland, we get any fist fights without fighting people
is likely going to be a bit more on the rowdy side. The way I imagine is that a Fianna will probably come from a very traditional background, maybe a community that keeps to itself but without coming off like he's a country bumpkin. The Fianna aren't Amish, they don't shun technology if it's useful. And now for fictional characters, I would suggest for inspiration as well. We'll start with Connor and Murphy McManus from the Boondock Saints, probably two of the most famous Irish characters in pop culture. Bit cartoonish at times, but they're fun characters nonetheless.
You think the men that built all this had it easy?
Hard men.
Doing hard shit! And that gives me a hard on! But not in a gay way or anything.
No, of course not.
Yeah, it goes without saying.
Next up, Mickey O'Neill from Snatch. This guy will give you a good idea of how a Fianna lives. He sticks close to his family that lives in an Irish traveler's caravan. Good inspiration for a Fianna community.
Sorry, Mickey. Just give us our money back and you can keep your caravan.
Why the fuck do I want a caravan? It's got no fucking wheels.
You're gonna send us and fight!
My dead body anyway! Go on!
Man,
Have you fight,
Okay,
Mickey?
now, we're
You
all-
know
we're selling
what
some other
happens
way of
when you
talking.
fight!
You need to sit down. Give us it there.
fuck's sake.
Here's one that's a bit more obscure. Slain McCroth from the 2080 comic named, well, Slain. He's a Celtic warrior whose journeys take him to some pretty weird and bizarre locations with bizarre characters to boot. There's some pretty good story ideas in this comic book. Next up, Cuchulainn, And now we're going to be digging into mythology. This is a guy who was a great warrior in his day and also came with an ability known as the Riestrad, which was basically a berserker rage. His type of character is right at home as a Fianna Arun, and my favorite figure from Celtic mythology, Finn McCool, the leader of the mythological Fianna, and yes, that's exactly where the Garou Fianna get their name from. In fact, Finn is actually name-checked as being Fianna kinfolk and one of their greatest no less, but the story is still told about and can give you good ideas for a Fianna leader. If one word can sum up who the Fianna are, it would be traditionalist. Some might wonder if being Celtic means anything in these modern days, but there's a reason the Fianna have kept these traditions alive. For the Fianna, being Celtic isn't just putting on kilts and blue war paint. There's something spiritual that binds them together. Something that makes this tribe more than just a collection of werewolves with similar philosophies and outlooks on life. Many of the tribes are built around ideas and philosophies, but the Fianna are more than ideas. They're a family. For them, being Celtic isn't just an idea, it's an identity, and one that belongs to them. It's why they're so tight-knit as a group, why they guard their kin to their dying breaths. Not just anyone can be Fianna. Being Fianna is in the spirit and the blood. That's why they sing their songs, that's why they tell their tales, and it's why the Fianna still keep to the old ways. And it's why they will always keep to the old ways.